The Nightingale is Kristin Hanna's most famous novel. The story of the Nightingale is set in World War II, and the story mainly focuses on two sisters, Vianne and Isabel. Vianne was orphaned at age 14 after her mother died, and her father was traumatized by his experiences in World War I. Because the two sisters have a completely different personality, they're not very close as sisters, so the story is usually told in separate perspectives. As the Germans are about to invade France, Vianne and her husband Antoine both knew that the war was looming very close and they might draft Antoine to fight for France. Meanwhile, Vianne's 18-year-old younger sister, Isabel, is finishing school and she gets expelled for her rebellious behavior and travels to Paris to join her still traumatized father, Julien. Shortly after she arrives, however, the German army approaches Paris and Julien tells his daughter to join her sister Vianne in Carriveau. On her way, Isabel meets a young communist named Gaëtan who tells her he plans on resisting against the Nazis and invites Isabel to come with him. Isabel eagerly accepts, but when she confesses her love for him, he leaves her near her sister's house, telling her she is not ready. The Germans soon occupy Carriveau with the Nazi officer Captain Beck billeting in Vianne's house. Vianne tolerates the German presence, fearing for the safety of Sophie and feeling overwhelmed without Antoine, who is in a prisoner of war camp. She even provides Beck with a list of communist and Jewish teachers at the school where she works, which leads to the firing of her best friend Rachel. Meanwhile, Isabel resents the German occupation and is eventually caught defacing a Nazi poster, but the people who catch her are the members of a resistance movement, and they put her to work distributing anti-Nazi pamphlets. In the spring of 1941, the group asks Isabel to deliver a letter to a contact in Paris. Isabel agrees, and her father reluctantly allows her to stay in his apartment. As she returns home one day, she comes across a British pilot who has been shot down. She brings the pilot to a resistance group meeting and proposes using the Pyrenees mountain ranges as an escape route. Ignoring the possibilities of execution and death, Isabel volunteers to lead the group herself. At the same time, she learns that her father and Gaëtan both work for the group as well. She now uses the name Julia Gervais. Isabel leads a group of 4 pilots to a town on the border of France and Spain. Here, she contacts her mother's friend and arranges for a guide to lead them across the mountains. After several grueling days, they make it to the British consulate in Spain, where Isabel explained what she accomplished, asked the British government to help her going forward, and received a code name, the Nightingale. Meanwhile, the situation in Carriveau worsens. In June 1941, Vianne's fired from her job when she questions why another teacher is being arrested, and she spends all the money she had in savings. The following winter, she grows sick after giving most of the available food to her daughter, and she agrees to accept help from Captain Beck only for Sophie's sake. By the summer of 1942, the Germans are sending foreign-born Jewish citizens to concentration camps, and Beck, who has grown close to Vianne as a friend, warns Vianne the day before the deportation in Carriveau is scheduled to take place. Vianne accompanies Rachel and her children to the border, hoping the family can sneak into the free zone. Rachel's daughter Sarah is shot dead in the attempt, and Rachel is caught the next day and deported. She begs Vianne to take her toddler son, Ari, and Vianne agrees. Beck then helps find false papers claiming Ari is Daniel Marique, the orphaned son of her husband Antoine's cousin. Elsewhere, Isabel continues to lead groups of airmen across the Pyrenees. In Carriveau, she and Gaëtan found a wounded American pilot and hid him in Vianne's barn. The pilot dies, but before Isabel can leave, Beck, who has been searching for the pilot, searches the barn. Beck and Isabel shot each other, and Vianne strikes back with a shovel. Beck dies, and Gaëtan disposes of both his body and the pilot's. Back in Carriveau, an SS officer named von Richter questions Vianne about Beck's disappearance, before announcing that he will be billeting with her. Vianne couldn't stand doing nothing to resist against the Nazis, and begins to work with the local resistance to hide Jewish children in a convent orphanage. When von Richter learns that Ari is not Vianne's biological child, she is forced to sleep with him in exchange for his silence. In May 1944, Isabel is arrested, tortured, and questioned about who the Nightingale is. Her father hears of Isabel's fate and turns himself in, claiming to be the Nightingale in the hopes of saving Isabel's life. His sacrifice is a way of an apology to his daughters for what he had done in the past. It shows that behind the cool facade, Julian always loved his daughters. He's then executed and Isabel is sent to a concentration camp for women. As the Nazis start to lose the war, von Richter becomes more abusive. By the time the Germans leave Caribou, Vianne is pregnant with von Richter's baby. Antoine then returns home, and Vianne does not tell him about von Richter, pretending instead that the baby is premature. Meanwhile, Isabel, now sick with pneumonia and typhus, is sent to another camp. Vianne learns that Rachel and Mark are dead and provides aid workers with a list of 19 children she had hidden. Vianne is devastated when 2 men arrive to take Ari to relatives in America. Later that spring, Isabel finally returns to Caribou. She is ultimately too weak to recover, however, and dies shortly after being reunited with Gaetan. Vianne and Isabel's stories are interspersed with scenes from 1995, as an elderly woman living in America debates whether to return to Paris for an event commemorating World War II passeurs. It eventually becomes clear that this woman is Vianne, and Julian, the son who ultimately accompanies her to Paris, is her child by von Richter. Julian knows virtually nothing of his family history until the memorial, after which Vianne is approached by both Gaetan and Ari. What I find really interesting about the Nightingale is that it proves how powerful women are and what they're capable of doing. The story basically proves wrong the idea that women are too weak to join the military and contribute to the war effort. Isabel and Vianne were very strong examples of what women are capable of doing. From Isabel hiding soldiers and helping them cross the Pyrenees, to Vianne rescuing Jewish children and putting them in an orphanage. These 2 women were a symbol for the power of women and were true war heroes. The Nightingale also illustrates the destruction of war. As countries will ultimately suffer great losses, there's not really a winning side to wars. But buildings are destroyed, cities are decimated, women and children are killed, a whole generation is lost, and people who survive suffer from physical and mental damages. It shows that wars destroy people's lives and changes people, with many examples in the book, with Julian suffering from World War I, Isabel dying from illness, Vianne suffering mentally, and so on. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. This took a long time, so make sure to like and subscribe.